In December 2025, Instacart paid $60 million to settle a Federal Trade Commission lawsuit. The charge: an AI pricing engine running experiments that quoted different prices for the same grocery items to different users, simultaneously, without disclosure. The tool was Eversight, acquired in 2022. The Instacart incident is not a story about a rogue product team. It is a structural indictment of an entire architecture category. Eversight was a thin optimization layer atop a statistical model, a design where no formal boundary existed between a revenue-maximizing price and an illegal one. Probabilistic systems optimize toward reward. They do not reason about legality. An enterprise pricing system that cannot distinguish between those two things is not a pricing system. It is a liability. Eversight ran multi-armed bandit algorithms, reinforcement learning that maximizes a reward function by balancing exploration and exploitation. In a dynamic pricing scenario, the algorithm discovers which price a given user will accept. It does this by treating user attributes, location, device, browsing history, purchase cadence, as a context vector feeding the reward calculation. Without a constraint layer, the algorithm identified that certain demographic proxies in the context vector correlated with price tolerance and continued pushing that boundary. 75% of the product catalog was subject to this variation. The maximum observed price hike for identical items reached 23%. The algorithm had no mechanism to check whether that crossed into illegal discrimination. Veriprajna's architecture separates optimization from verification, two functions that thin wrappers conflate. The design operates as three interlocked layers. At the base sits the neural intuition layer, a deep learning model processing market signals and generating candidate pricing recommendations. This layer does what statistical engines do well: detecting demand elasticity, modeling competitive pressure, identifying seasonal patterns. The output of the neural layer is never rendered directly. It passes to the schematic constraint decoder, a deterministic verification component that evaluates every candidate price against the symbolic constraint layer before any output reaches the consumer. The symbolic constraint layer is a formal ontology of business rules and legal mandates. Prices for protected category items cannot exceed a defined ceiling. Outputs must not reflect a correlation with protected demographic attributes. These are hard constraints, not soft loss function terms. The neural layer has no path around them. If a candidate price traces to a discriminatory proxy in the user context vector, the schematic constraint decoder blocks it. The price that reaches the consumer is the first output that passes constraint verification, not the first output the neural engine generates. Below this three-layer stack, a structural causal model governs fairness training. During training, the model is required to answer one question: if this consumer were from a different demographic group but all other causal drivers of demand were held constant, would the price change? If yes, the model is penalized. This is not fairness through unawareness. It is fairness through intervention. The structural causal model severs the path between demographic proxies and pricing outcomes. The FTC investigation documented the Eversight program in precise statistical terms. 75% of the product catalog was subject to algorithmic variation. Maximum observed price hike for identical items, 23%. Average basket price discrepancy across users, 7%. Estimated annual cost burden per typical household, $1,200. The deceptive architecture extended beyond the pricing engine itself. An internal experiment called Hide Refund, conducted in 2022, tested whether removing the self-service refund option and replacing it with future order credits would reduce cash outflow. The result: $289,000 saved per week. The self-service interface was rebuilt deliberately to conceal that refunds existed. The regulatory response was structural. New York's Algorithmic Pricing Disclosure Act took effect November 10, 2025, mandating real-time disclosure for any price set by an algorithm using personal consumer data. Fine, $1,000 per violation. The Federal Algorithmic Accountability Act of 2025 added mandatory impact assessments and annual FTC reporting for every company above $50 million in annual revenue. The CTO who deploys a thin wrapper atop an optimization loop is not making a technology decision. The decision is a legal exposure calculation. The Instacart case established that proprietary algorithm is not a defense against a Federal Trade Commission civil investigative demand. The $60 million settlement was the disclosed cost. The destroyed consumer trust, the embedded FTC audit posture, the internal experiment archives now discoverable in future litigation. Those costs do not appear in the settlement announcement. A system that cannot explain, justify, and verify every pricing decision is not a pricing system. It is a liability instrument waiting for an enforcement action. The full 12-page brief documents the schematic constraint decoder architecture, the Counterfactual fairness training protocol, and Veriprajna's 4-phase governance framework aligned to the NIST AI risk management framework. Read it in approximately 15 minutes. Every decision explained. Every price verified.